Once again, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties we've been having. Hopefully you have seen my email about how we are going to try and address those. For those of you that usually join the class live, so we're going to have to make some adjustments. Hopefully a better workaround will be available soon, but for right now we're going to go this approach. For those of you that watch the videos later, it's not going to be as much of an issue for you, but if you do run into any problems, please get in contact with me. Let me know what I can do to help, and if there's some sort of technical issue that needs to be addressed. So our focus now is transitioning more into some practical things. Instead of talking about research in general and research thinking, we're going to go about some of the basics related to finding sources. Now that I have a topic, for example, what do I do about going about finding those sources that will help me with this topic? We have to recognize that there are differences between types of sources, and that will have an impact on the kind of work that you do and what you'll be looking for. One distinction is between primary and secondary sources. Primary sources refer to recordings of original events, sources that are firsthand. So, for example, in the paper you're doing for this class, your primary source will be the text that you are looking at. Secondary sources are analyses of primary sources, or what individuals have to say about those primary sources. So in this case, what other scholars have to say about the passage that you're looking at. If we were doing a historical research, primary sources would be newspapers of the time, or written diaries, or something like that. People that interacted with the particular person you're interested in. While secondary sources would be what scholars have said about those events or those people. Another way to distinguish, or another difference between sources, has to do with the differences between academic sources and popular sources. Popular sources are focused on or targeted for a general audience, and those are often less detailed, as we've talked about before, less citation. The focus of popular sources is to be very broad because you're trying to appeal to a greater number of people. Academic sources, however, are focused on a specialized audience. They are more complex. They may have a special type of jargon or language that's used. Additionally, often the emphasis is for the author of an academic source. An author is going to have a certain set of credentials. Some popular sources might require a certain set of credentials, but it's not necessarily something that's across the board like it would be with an academic source. Also important to keep in mind with respect to biblical studies research is the difference between religious sources and secular sources. Some people approach biblical studies without any sort of belief in God or belief in any sort of supernatural. And so they study the Bible as a piece of literature that's been very important in human history, but that means they are going to approach it differently than people who are religious themselves. And certainly Christians are going to approach biblical texts differently than they would be Jews. If it's an academic source, the hope would be that an academic, whether religious or secular, would certainly come from a position, but would also take that into account and try to consider alternatives and those kind of things, whereas a popular level source might not necessarily address those kind of issues, may not address their biases. Also, one important distinction to make, especially as you're working on your research paper, is the difference between sources that are useful and sources that are not useful. Depending on your topic, you could find a lot of material and we'll talk some a bit about this in a little bit, but you can find a lot of material about your specific topic, and it may not be useful to you. And so you have to go about distinguishing between what sources are going to be useful for you and what sources are not. And so in thinking about this as you're approaching your paper or any sort of research project, there are a couple things to keep in mind, or some questions that you might ask as you begin, so that you can figure out what to do and develop an approach that's going to work for you. So first of all, in thinking about sources, you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm looking for? Where I'm looking for, or I want to know something about a certain subject, where is that, what is it that I'm looking for? Is this information going to be contained in biblical text? Is this information going to be in a book? Is it going to be in a monograph? Is it going to be in a commentary? Is it going to be in a journal article? And so, what information I'm looking for, am I looking for? And then what resource is going to have that kind of information? And then finally, once I've kind of determined I'm looking for journal articles about this biblical text, or I'm looking about commentaries on a particular book of the Bible, how do I go about locating the resource? How do I find the commentaries on John? How do I find journal articles on the woman taken in adultery passage? And so I have to begin there by thinking about the sources that I'm looking for and what function they will serve in my overall project. When it comes to finding sources in biblical studies, there are a couple of resources that are very useful. And these are the ones that I want to talk a little bit about, talk about what information is provided in these resources, and help you figure out what's going to be the most useful as you begin your process. One place to start when entering into a research project is the library catalog. This is a useful source to determine what is available out there, specifically what is available in the library's context. For example, our library, Faulkner Library. The library catalog allows you to do searches by title, by a specific author, by a subject, sometimes even by keywords, so that you can try and find information that is available to you. Again, the library catalog covers materials that are only in the particular library you're searching. It will not tell you what all is available. It will only tell you what is available in Faulkner's library, for example. But it will tell you the different types of material that are available. So if there are books about your title, by your title, if there are books with your title, or books by your author, or in that subject. Reference works like encyclopedias and dictionaries would be covered in the library catalog. Journals would be, not specifically journal articles though in many cases, but specific journals. Right? Do you have the Journal of Biblical Literature in this library? As well as media, CDs, DVDs, maybe electronic files. A lot of information is available on electronic resources these days, ebooks, other types of files. Maybe if it's really old, VHS, cassette tape, record, probably not too many of those around, probably not getting a lot of use. But all the different types of media, in a sense, all the different types of sources are available through your card catalog, library catalog. It's important to recognize how library catalogs are organized, not only when it comes to subjects. There's certain ways that books are organized in a card catalog, and knowing that organization can be very helpful when looking for material, but then also recognizing there's different types of organization within the library itself. So, for example, there are two major classification systems for libraries in the United States. One is the Dewey Decimal System, and the other is the Library of Congress Cataloging System. The Dewey Decimal System is organizes organizes works according to subjects, assigns it a code, and then also the initials of the author's, or the letters of the author's last name. The Library of Congress has a much longer code, including a 2-letter prefix, and also includes the author's last name. What this is useful for is what we might call browsing the stacks. You know, if you look something up in the card catalog, you might find a couple different sources. Right? I'm looking for commentaries on the Gospel of John. So I go to card catalog and I look up commentaries on John, and so I get a couple, and so I go to the section. Well, with it being organized according to these codes, you know, I'm able to just kind of browse the stacks, look and see what books are next to the book I'm looking for, what books are close by, right? Because the books that are close by are more likely than not going to be related to what you're looking for, and so you might find something just by walking through the stacks in a library, stacks of books, that you might not have found through the card catalog because you didn't know to look for it. But now that you're actually like physically looking through books, you've discovered it. So don't ignore the fact of going over to the library or a library, wherever you are, and walking through the library and seeing what's available. Somewhat similar is a website known as WorldCat. WorldCat essentially functions as a catalog of catalogs. While the library catalog tells you what is in your library, WorldCat tells you what is available in all sorts of libraries. And so it's a world catalog. And so if you don't have a source, you know, if you don't have a book here, you can find who would have it. Right? So it might be a public library that's nearby, and so you can go there. It might not be something that's close by, and so you might need to get it through interlibrary loan. Additionally, WorldCat has an extensive coverage, not just books, but includes things like theses and dissertations, other types of media, electronic files, discs, CD-ROMs, some of the things that are really older at this point. You can do all sorts of types of searches with WorldCat, many similar to things that you can do with a library catalog, but more extensive. So again, the subject, title, but then also keywords, like if there's a keyword you're looking for, or if you're looking for a specific type of resource. I'm looking for only books, or I'm only looking for dissertations on this topic. Or it can also tell you what's available. And it might be something that's only available in what's known as microfilm. And so if you've never operated with microfilm, it's a rather interesting process where they put a microfiche, for example, essentially copy a book onto a card that you then put in a reader, and you kind of read through it. A lot of older books that would have been damaged, newspapers, etc., are saved that way because otherwise they wouldn't be available to people. But they're by copying them onto a card like this, in older times they managed to save or preserve the books. The problem with WorldCat is it can be too much information. Just because, often you can have the same book, but it's in different editions, or it's released in slightly different bindings, and so it has a slightly different publication date. The difference between hardback and paperback, and so you just get pages and pages of things, and it depending on how specific your subject is, right? If you just type in Bible, and all sorts of works are going to come up, and they're not necessarily going to be things that that would be necessarily useful to you. Let's take a look at a couple of different catalogs. We'll look at the library catalog for Faulkner, and then we'll look at WorldCat a little bit.